Greetings, this is Jeffrey Payne at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, joining you today for another quick brief related to the maritime domain. Today's topic is maritime militias, which are a new challenge to the maritime space and something that is increasingly of worry around the world. Start with, on this topic, let's get into what is a maritime militia. In essence, they are commercial vessels manned by civilian crews that have received aspects of military or security training, and that can be called upon to serve as a state security function. In theory, they're conceived of as a backup to traditional state maritime security services like the Navy or the Coast Guard. But in terms of how they're conceived and how they're actually used in the real world, there's a big divide. Often they are employed, these maritime militias, as an asymmetric tool against foreign actors to achieve a political purpose. When we're talking about maritime militias in today's world, what we're really referring to most of the time is China's maritime militia and its operations in the South China Sea. China is not the only actor using a maritime militia, even in the South China Sea. Vietnam has one as well. But China's maritime militia is particular in its size, scope, and aggression. It's much larger than any other maritime militia. The missions and the operations that they engage in are of a much wider variety, and they're very, very aggressive in how they approach their aims. They are routinely used in the South China Sea. They're also operating in the East China Sea. The methodology is to impede maritime functions of foreign civilian vessels or foreign Coast Guard naval vessels. The common methodologies that often appear in the news media include the civilian swarm, as they're called, these are essentially fleets of commercial fishing vessels that will surround and antagonize a Coast Guard or naval vessel of a foreign country, or a commercial vessel of a foreign flag that is operating in an area that China does not want it to be operating in. Another methodology that they use is often the signal for collision. Essentially, they chart a course at sea that will put them in a collision course with another vessel. This has been used regularly in the East China Sea against Japanese maritime self-defense forces. As the status of the militia is unknown, is it a state vessel or is it a civilian vessel? That's the whole point of these maritime militias, is that their true purpose is hidden because they look like fishing vessels or other commercial vessels at sea. The aggression that these militias use cannot be attributed directly to the Chinese state. And thus, if you are the Japanese Self-Defense Force or the Vietnamese Navy or the Filipino Navy, this inhibits your ability to respond. This puts you in a circumstance that is very complicated both legally as well as morally. So this is the definition of how they are an asymmetric force. Why maritime militias are problematic in a rough sense? It has to do with responsibility. The militia issue highlights the tensions throughout the Western Pacific. China's actions in the South China Sea in particular are very aggressive. They're asymmetric. They are intended to put other claimants of the South China Sea on an unstable footing. This maritime militia also undermines claims by any state employing militia forces as a responsible maritime actor. So essentially, even if you could conceivably create a maritime militia that has a legitimate purpose, which is remote, China's actions have essentially spoiled the bunch. It would always be compared to how China has used them, and that's massively problematic. The Chinese maritime militia also substantially increases the probability of incident at sea, and this is probably the most dangerous component of what these maritime militia vessels have introduced in the South China Sea. The likelihood of a collision, the likelihood of damage, the likelihood of loss of life has substantially increased in the South China Sea among various claimants and commercial as well as military vessels because of these militia vessels being operational. And added to this, there's clear evidence that a state using such forces is not following the established rules and norms governing maritime activity. This undermines UNCLOS, it undermines the history of responsible vessels at sea, of providing assistance to those that need aid. There's a whole source of undermining these values that govern the maritime domain. These maritime militias can in many ways be considered a game changer. To apply these to the core of the NESA region, and this is the Indian Ocean region, two questions to all of you. Is there evidence of such maritime militias being employed in the Indian Ocean region today? I have a picture here. This picture is from an incident that occurred last year. Most of you are probably familiar with it, but there are countries that employ to various capacities forces that you could define as maritime militias in a sense. And the second question I have is, what does the use of such asymmetric signify to you? Does it imply strength? Does it imply weakness? Does it imply an intention to redefine political norms or undermine legal values? Why use maritime militias? What's their value, if in your viewpoint, in your analysis? So if you have answers to those questions, you want to get back to us at NESA. As ever, here is our contact information. You have the website that you can contact us through. You have an email address, which gets us to our alumni office, and we're happy to receive those and respond to you and start a conversation. You also can get at us at Twitter. There's a Twitter handle, Facebook as well, and you can even comment here on the NESA's YouTube page. So we're providing you all these different mechanisms by which you can reach out to us, and we hope that you do. With that, there will be more of these quick briefs coming in the future. I wish you all a pleasant day and hope you all remain safe and healthy during these very odd times. Thank you so much.